The islands of penguins and army patrols. Newsround reports from one of Britain's loneliest outposts. Hello again, a special Newsround today coming from here in the Falkland Islands. This is Stanley, the capital. 6 years ago it was controlled by soldiers from Argentina who'd invaded the islands. But on this very day 6 years ago, British troops landed on South Georgia, about 800 miles away from here, to begin to free the Falklands. We'll be looking at how life has changed since the war. But first, here's John with the news.
Exactly 6 years ago today, British forces recaptured from Argentina this tiny South Atlantic island, South Georgia. It marked the beginning of the end of what became known as the Falklands War. The Falkland Islands and South Georgia have been run by Britain for over 150 years. But Argentina claims they really belong to her. In 1982, she invaded them. Britain reacted quickly, sending what's called a task force of warships and aircraft thousands of miles to get the islands back. The United Nations tried to prevent any fighting, but failed. After weeks at sea, the task force arrived. The battles were very fierce. A British submarine sank an Argentinian aircraft carrier. Hundreds of sailors died. Argentinian aircraft attacked British ships. Many British soldiers and sailors were killed. Gradually, British troops fought their way across the Falklands, driving the invading forces back. Marching very fast for hour after hour, they called it yomping, across moor and mountain, the British forces eventually reached the hills above Stanley, the capital. After a final battle, the Argentinian soldiers surrendered. Over 1,000 men had been killed, but the islands were back under British control once again.
The day Argentina surrendered, up here on this mountain there was a large group of British soldiers, and with them was a BBC TV news crew who'd been with them during the whole war. And in fact, one of that crew is with us right now, filming me as I talk, and I'm going to let you see him. John Jockle, what was it like that day they surrendered?
Very much like today, Roger. It was cold, sunny and windy, and behind the rocks here you'll see that these are where we were staying and sleeping in these rocks, and in the valley behind was the artillery barrage which was firing on Port Stanley the night before the surrender. And
you did something special that day, didn't you?
Yes, I suddenly thought, well, it'd be nice to kind of plant something here, and I put a tin of compo rations in the rocks behind me somewhere, and so we go and try and find it. It was somewhere around here, Roger, I think. Oh, look. Very familiar. Ah, here we are.
That's it?
After all these years, 6 years, still there.
And what's in there?
That's a tin of compo processed cheese. Fantastic.
This is one of the biggest changes since the war. The huge new military camp that's been built at Mount Pleasant, 30 miles from Stanley. About 2,000 British soldiers are based here. The big runway means that if there's ever an emergency, reinforcements can be flown in by jet in just 18 hours. But what are the chances of another invasion? Lieutenant Colonel Mike Squire is one of the most senior soldiers on the Falklands.
We think it's highly unlikely. There's never been an official end to the 1982 conflict, an official agreement between ourselves and the Argentinians. But notwithstanding that, we think it's highly unlikely.
Even so, they're always training to deal with an invasion. These Royal Engineers are practicing filling in holes in case the vital runway is bombed. With their huge tractors, nicknamed Tonkas, they can repair big bomb craters in about 8 hours. The holes are topped with thick concrete slabs and then cleaned off before a final inspection. The runway's vital not only for the big jets that would bring emergency help, but also for the Phantom fighters stationed at Mount Pleasant. They'd be sent out if any enemy aircraft approached. And this is where the enemy would be spotted. This is Mount Kent, one of 3 similar centres on mountain tops around the islands. They act as the eyes of the Falklands. Inside the domes are powerful radars, keeping watch day and night. The radar operators look out for blips on their screens that would show if an unidentified plane had strayed closer than 150 miles to the Falklands. The mountaintop is often in the clouds. It's cold and windy, guarded over by Rover the cat. 50 soldiers live here in a jumble of cabins, and they've tried hard to make it feel just like home. But it's not just the skies that are watched. This patrol is setting off to scout around a lonely stretch of the coast. The Falklands are about the size of Wales, made up of 2 big islands and about 300 smaller ones. There are hundreds of miles of coastline and dozens of inlets, any one of which could be the site for a sneak attack. The soldiers sent to the Falklands stay for 4 months at a time, getting to know the windswept landscape and coming across some of the creatures that live in it. These are Gentoo penguins, just one of the 4 varieties living on the islands. Getting around the Falklands isn't easy. There's only one proper road, and the rough terrain means the army has to use some strange-looking vehicles. This bog frog has extra wide tyres to get through the muddy bogs all over the islands. Behind is a Samson, used for dragging out trucks and cars that become stuck or break down. Strangest of all is the Bimble van, which can travel just about anywhere. The average age of these soldiers is 19. There are now far fewer than there were, but it still costs a lot to keep them here. Since the war, over £2 billion have been spent on the forces here. Some British politicians are worried so much money is being spent. They want the government to talk to Argentina and make a deal that would end the dispute over the Falklands. That would mean many more soldiers could go home. The government says they're ready to talk, but only if Argentina drops its claim that it's the rightful owner of the islands. Newsround's back to normal tomorrow, but for the rest of the week I'll have more reports about the Falkland Islands and some of its inhabitants.
Falkland Islands. British outpost that was invaded by Argentina 6 years ago and freed again after a short but hard-fought war. A lot has changed since the war, but for many islanders, life is much the same as it's always been.
The Falklands are 8,000 miles from Britain, but just 300 miles from Argentina, the country that still claims it's the rightful owner of the islands. Most Falkland Islanders live in Stanley, the capital. The rest are scattered through the countryside. Saunders Island is one of the most remote settlements, home for just 7 people. In the summer, these beaches would be packed with penguins and seals, but at this time of year, it's one of the world's loneliest spots. Like the rest of the Falklands, there are no trees, and the strong wind sweeps over the hills. This little collection of farmhouses is the only settlement on the island. We're here to meet 9-year-old Tracy Evans, who's lived in the Falklands all her life. On weekdays, she'd be having lessons now, either over a 2-way radio or from the teacher who comes to visit every 6 weeks. But it's the weekend, and there's work of a different kind to be done. Wool is the Falklands' biggest industry, and there are 10,000 sheep on Saunders.
Well, really, with shearing, I'm doing my lessons, so I only get a few hours in the shed, but on the weekends I'm in the shed all the time. I always do go out on the gathers. It was this time that I went out on all the gathers. And
What are the gathers?
it's where we go out on horseback and with the dogs, so we can gather up all the sheep for shearing.
Tracy's cousin Louise is the only other child on Saunders, and Tracy misses having other children to play with. Her pets are very important. Blue the cat is a favourite. So's Sarah the sheep, who's usually very fond of ginger biscuits. There's no phone, so Tracy uses a radio to talk to friends on other islands.
Been taking sheep away the last few days, but I fell off my horse, have I? Okay. But Twinkle was on. Twinkle, she only shied though.
Every morning, Tracy milks one of the cows.
Stand, cow!
Apart from milk, the farm also provides eggs, vegetables and meat. When she's 11, Tracy will have to leave to go to senior school in Stanley as a boarder. It's not something her mother is looking forward to.
It'll be really quiet and I won't have anybody to say run and do this and run and do that. I'll have to do it all myself then.
Do you want to stay on Saunders Island forever?
Well, I don't know. Well, yes and no, really. I wouldn't. There's reasons I wouldn't, there's reasons I wouldn't. I couldn't leave my animals. That's one of the reasons why I wouldn't leave.
This is Roger Finn for Newsround in the Falkland Islands.
And Roger will have another story for us from the Falklands tomorrow. But that's it for today from me.
A fighter pilot, but by an airman in a spotter plane who wasn't supposed to shoot at all. But he broke the rules and fired at the Baron with his rifle, killing him with a single bullet. Well, all this week, Roger is sending us reports from the Falklands, and today he's been looking at the tiny capital city, Stanley, which is home for more than half the islanders.
Stanley is the world's most southerly capital city. It's also one of the world's smallest. Only 1,200 people live there. Stanley was first settled 150 years ago, soon after Britain took control of the Falklands. In the early days, it was a stopping-off place for ships sailing around the tip of South America. It's always been an important fishing centre. In the harbour today are dozens of big fishing ships from all over the world who pay the Falklands to fish around the islands. Since the war with Argentina, Stanley has grown steadily with help from the British government. It's home for the island's main junior school and only senior school. About 300 pupils are taught here, up to GCSE level. And another 80 get their lessons in a very special way. This radio mast in the playground is used by the Camp Education Centre, which teaches children living in the remote countryside, known as the camp.
Oh, yeah.
Children like 9-year-old Tracy Evans, who lives on Saunders Island, and 7-year-old Donna Carlier, daughter of the general in charge of the British forces here.
What page do you mean? Because I can't find exactly where you are. So we finished page 12.
Right, okay, so it's page 12. So in fact, we need your reinforcement book next. Your reinforcement book.
The lesson lasts half an hour, and then the teacher sets about 4 hours homework. Apart from radio lessons, teachers fly out to spend several days every month with the camp children. They fly over some dangerous reminders of the war 6 years ago. In fact, there are all sorts of dangerous things lying around, like rockets and grenades. These ones have actually been made safe, but some have been found live in people's gardens. But the real problem are the mines. Most of these are safe behind fences, but very rarely they do find one outside the fences, and that's when they send for Red Fire. Red Fire is a robot that's been specially designed to destroy mines found outside minefields. It's controlled by soldiers from the Army's Bomb Disposal Unit. It works by burning away the plastic covers on the mines and then slowly burning up the explosive inside. That way the mine doesn't blow up and destroy the robot. Stanley is surrounded by dozens of minefields. It's too dangerous and expensive to try and clear them all away, so they're left, a deadly reminder of the war that freed the islands. This is Roger Finn for Newsround in the Falklands.
And that's all from us today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, bye-bye.
World for another of Roger's reports from the Falkland Islands. Today he looks at their most famous wildlife inhabitants, penguins, and the fears some islanders have about the future of the birds.
4 different types of penguin make their home on the British-owned Falkland Islands, and apart from the penguins there's a rich variety of bird life. Flocks of tame upland geese are one of the most common sights on the islands. King cormorants are found along the coastline. And oyster catchers wander the beaches looking for food. But it's penguins that are found in the biggest numbers. These are Gen 2 penguins, the only ones that stay on the islands all year round. This particular colony has taken over part of the shore no human being would ever dare step on. It's a minefield, left over from the war with Argentina 6 years ago. Ian Strange is a Falklander who's been studying wildlife for nearly 30 years.
Well, this always used to be what we call a hauling up ground. They used to come up here in the winter time. But now the minefield is here. It's given them an element of protection, and they're using it for breeding. And they've started to breed here over the last 2 years, which is one up for a minefield.
There's no chance of them blowing themselves up by stepping on a mine?
No, the small mines that are in here need something, quite a considerable pressure put on them, and the birds are just not heavy enough to set them off.
They spend much of the day preening their tiny feathers, covering them with a special oil that makes them waterproof. Their flippers are very hard and stiff, used to paddle quickly through the sea. Their favourite foods are krill, a small red shrimp, and squid, which at this time of year are found in great numbers around the islands. There are about 500 penguins in this colony behind me. That's actually quite small for the Falklands. At some times of the year, on some beaches, you can find as many as 2 million penguins. But at the moment, most of the penguin species are away out at sea, catching fish. They're not the only ones out fishing. Recently, boats from all over the world have come to the Falklands to catch squid. They catch so many that wildlife experts worry there may soon be none left for the penguins. The government controls fishing, limiting the number of boats and making them pay for licenses. But Ian Strange is still worried.
I tend to feel that too much attention is being taken to the commercial side of it. Yes, the licenses are being issued and fishing boats are restricted, not to how much they catch, but to the number that are coming in to catch this. I think there's a possibility of a conflict there. The fishing industry are going for the same thing that the birds need.
For Newsround, this is Roger Finn in the Falkland Islands.
An attempted
For the last of there and finds out what the future holds for them.
Since the war with Argentina 6 years ago, a lot has been happening in the Falklands. This little settlement at Fox Bay now has the Falklands' only woolen mill. Farming's always been the island's main occupation, but now projects like this mean more job choices when children grow up. The Falklands wool is amongst the best and softest in the world, and this mill uses it to make about 50 of these jumpers every week. They'd like to make more, but they've got a problem that many businesses in the Falklands have got. There's just not enough people to do the work. So these children at school in Stanley will have no trouble finding a job. Most liked Falkland life and wanted to stay.
It's peaceful. It's not, you can walk around the streets in the night without being hurt or anything. I've been out to a few of the islands, so you could see a lot of seals and penguins and other wildlife.
What do you want to do when you leave school?
Well, I'd like to go back to England for a few years perhaps and then come back, and I'd like to be a pilot in the air service I got down here.
Some of the older children complained that there wasn't enough to do.
There's nowhere to go in the evenings or weekends. I mean, you can walk around, but that's about it. Now it's winter, it's too cold really. There's the youth club, but that's only open for a couple of hours a week. So there needs to be more really for young people to do, I think.
I like the life, especially where we are. There's nobody else around us. I think just the quiet really, there's no trouble, well, very little trouble. I think the sort of the clean air, the way of life, it's very quiet. That's probably the best thing.
For Newsround, this is Roger Finn in the Falkland Islands.
And